I can statement for today is I can find common denominators. That should be an S at the end of that, sorry. I can find common denominators. Now remember that your denominator is your number in the bottom of your fraction, right? So 12 would be my denominator of 7/12ths, and 6 would be my denominator of the fraction 5/6. Remember also that the denominator tells us our whole, right? Our whole number, so what this is broken into. So essentially, if 12 is my whole number and this is my whole, I'd break it up into 12 parts. 4, 5, 6, we'll pretend that that's pretty, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we're pretending that this is pretty and equal. Here's my whole. I broke it up into 12 parts. I can count them. There's 12 pieces here. And to show 7/12ths, I would simply just shade in 7 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to show 7 out of 12. So the 12 tells me my whole number. Okay? We don't need that. So your denominator is what tells you what your whole is. So we're going to try and find common denominators because in order to add fractions, we want to have a common denominator or the same number on the bottom of the fraction. So right now, we wouldn't be able to add these, technically. So we want to find a common denominator or the same number on the bottom of the fraction. So the easiest way to do this first is to simply multiply the denominator and the numerator by the opposite number. So take this for example, 7/12ths. Well, I see that I'm trying to find a common denominator for 7/12ths and 5/6. So what I'll do is multiply this fraction by 6/6 because that's my denominator. So I'll take this, and I got my 6 from right here, from my opposite fraction. Okay? I would multiply those across, so 7 times 6 is 42, and 12 times 6 is 72. So that's my first step. Now, I chose to multiply this fraction by the denominator of this fraction, so I'll take 5/6 and multiply that by the denominator of this fraction to come up with common denominators, because you'll see that if you look at the bottom equations, 6 times 12 is the same thing as 12 times 6, so I know I'm going to get the same denominator in the bottom. So 5 times 12 is 60, and I know from over here that 6 times 12 or 12 times 6 is 72. So now I have the same denominator in both of my fractions. That's the first way that you can find a common denominator. The other way that you can do it is by, I'm going to rewrite and also draw a line, because that was my first way. The other way you can do it is also by thinking of a factor or a number that you know goes into both equations, or both fractions rather. So what do I mean by that? I will show you. Let me just rewrite this here. So where's my pen tool? So with the top one, all I did was multiply the opposite fraction by the denominator. So I got this 6 from this fraction, I got this 12 from this fraction, or this denominator. That's all I did. But for this one, what you can do is think of a number that's a multiple of the other. So 6 and 12 are multiples of one another, right? 6 is a factor of 12, right? So what I can do then is say, okay, well, how can I turn 6 into 12? 6 times what will give me 12 if I just want to leave this fraction alone and only change another fraction? So I'd ask myself, 6 times what gives me 12? If you said 2, you are correct. And what I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. So 5 times 2 is 10. 6 times 2 is 12. My new fraction is 10/12. And you can see that my denominator is the same as this denominator. So now I'm able to add them, these two fractions. And I don't have to do anything with this fraction now because the 12 and the 12 match up. I have common denominators. So some might argue that this way is easier because you don't have to think of a factor, but you do end up with a bigger number. This way you end up with a smaller number and only have to change one of your fractions usually. So there's two different ways that you can do it. You can multiply by the opposite denominator, like I did here, or you can think of a factor for one of your denominators and multiply together to get a common denominator in the bottom.